Hi guys, it's Rob from Royal Balls, and we've got another clutch hatching. This one is a particularly important one in terms of proving out females. This is a pastel het lavender to a visual lavender male, and I have two pastel het lavenders, sisters, and the first female has already given me visuals, but this female in her first clutch did not give me any visual lavenders. So this is another chance to prove out that she is actually het for lavender. So let's take a look. Okay, I've got another clutch to share with you guys today. This is day 60 for clutch number 7. We've got 8 eggs. This is a pastel het lavender paired to a visual lavender, and this female, this is her second clutch. I paired her het to het for her first clutch and she gave me no visuals. Her sister did, but she did not. So I'm pairing her to a visual this time, and all I want is visual lavenders. That will do me fine. And you can see we got one. So she has proved out to be het, even though that first clutch did not give any visual lavenders. So let's cut this clutch. We have pastel, fire in the mix, so we could get fireflies, we could get fires, all of which will be het lavender, and we could get pastel lavender, firefly lavender, or fire lavenders, which are going to be really hard to tell apart. So let me just zoom you in. This clearly is a visual lavender. White head, so pastel more than likely. So there we go, that's my visual lavender, and it looks like a pastel lavender. Let's take this guy here, very white head. This is a firefly het lavender. That makes it easier to cut. There we go, firefly, het lavender, so fire, pastel, het lavender. Let's take this one, this is another het I think. Pastel, het lavender. This is another visual lavender. There we go, okay, I'm not sure what that is, we'll have to wait for that to come out, but it's a visual lavender. So we've got 2 hets and 2 lavenders. Damn. That's another het. That's a fire or firefly. Probably firefly het lavender. Here's another one that's already pipped. We'll use the hole that it's cut. Another visual lavender. There we go. That's another lavender. So we're three and three. Another lavender. Pastel lavender possibly. So that's 4 visuals, 3 hets and 1 last egg. Let's see if we can break the odds and get 5 visuals here. Oh yes! So there's another visual lavender. That one is just a lavender, I think, not pastel and not fire, because it's quite orange. And that's the 5th visual lavender we got. So 5 lavenders and 3 hets out of 8 eggs. Nice. So 8 eggs. This one is a fire or firefly het lavender. This one's a visual lavender. This one is pastel het lavender. There's another visual. There's another visual. This is firefly het lavender. Another 2 visuals here and here. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 visuals and 3 hets. Let's put those back in the incubator and wait for them to come out, and I'll show you what they look like when they come out. Good odds on that clutch, and yes, mum is actually a het. Alright, let's take a look at these. Now they're all out of the egg, and we'll start to do some IDs. The pairing was a fire lavender to a pastel het lavender. So we've got obviously some visual lavenders in here, from the visual to the het, and the genes at play are pastel and fire. So when we do the IDs, the first thing we do is let our eyes do the work, and we can immediately pick out 3 snakes which are not lavenders. That should be pretty straightforward. Anybody can do that. You see the rest are all visual lavenders, and we'll come back to those in a moment. But for now, let's focus on the hets. And let's see if we can identify what we have. And you can see that one snake here, this one at the back, is a little bit duller than the other 2. But they're all very bright. So we know, because they're bright, and if we look at the head stamps, you can see the head stamp is blushed and silvery white. Blushed and silvery white, that all 3 of these snakes must contain pastel. Okay, so which ones are going to be fire? Well, fire's a brightening and a reducing gene, and in these particular animals we are going to see some vertical striping. So immediately we can differentiate between this guy and these other 2, which are much more striped. Now if we look at the head stamp, you can see the head stamp on this one is a silvery black. The head stamp on these 2 is actually quite white. It's a very different head stamp. So if I just pull out mum, here is mum. She's a pastel het lavender. And if we look at the head stamps, you can see the blushing on both head stamps. This one has gone a little bit browner because she's older, but you can also see that she's stayed very bright, and lavender tends to do that, which is why this pastel is also particularly bright, because het lavender actually is quite visible in that the snake stays brighter. So this guy here is a pastel het lavender, just like Mum. You can see the typical alien head patterns here. So the only other gene at play in these two here is fire, and these are pastel fires, so firefly. And I want you to just have a look at the head stamps. You see that arrow shaped head stamp there? So this guy here is a firefly het lavender, and if we have a look at the head stamp, if you'll keep still for us, this is a firefly het lavender. Let's have a look at the head stamp, and you can see the arrow shaped head stamp, the very strong arrow shaped head stamp there, quite bright and quite banded, which is exactly what these guys are. You see the head stamp is quite characteristic. The banding and the pattern is exactly the same on these two snakes here. So we have two firefly het lavenders. Look at that head stamp there compared to the head stamp on this girl here. You see the head stamps are almost identical. So we have two firefly het lavenders and one pastel, and you can see the head stamp on this does not have that characteristic arrow shape. It's a slightly different shape, and it's also slightly darker pastel on its own as opposed to pastel fire. So this one here, the orangey one, is pastel. The other two brighter ones, banded, are firefly. All three of them het for lavender. Okay, so we have now a bunch of visual lavenders, and we know that pastel and fire are both brightening genes, and we have one snake here, this orange one down here, that is much more orange than the others, and this one is the one that is most likely to be a straight lavender. There is no fire and no pastel in this. You see the orange on the head, and all of the others have a white head. So this one is probably just lavender. Let me show you an adult lavender. Okay, so this is an adult lavender, which I'm saying is the 2-year-old version of this guy. And you can see, if she lets me pick up the head, you can see her head stamp is orange in the middle. It's now yellower, it's gone pale, but she has the same head stamp as this one, and this is the only snake in the bunch that matches this one. So this one, straight lavender. Okay, let's zoom back in, and we have two snakes here which are quite bright orange and two which are much lighter. So the lightest one of the bunch is this one. This is very pale, very light coloured. The head very light coloured. There you go, you see the head very light coloured, but this is very washed out. So this one must be the firefly lavender. This is both pastel and fire, and you can see how washed out that snake is. So we have the two extremes. We have the straight lavender, and we have the one with pastel and fire, which is really washed out. And then we have 3 snakes, which are going to be almost impossible to ID. This one is the brightest one. They all have white heads. So these are either pastel or fire, but not both. So pastel lavender or fire lavender, not both. And I suspect that this guy here, slightly more orange than the other two, is fire. This one is fire. And the other two are pastel lavenders. This one has a very, very light coloured head. This one also very light coloured head. Very difficult to tell until they shed and grow out a little bit, but I think once they do shed we will see differences. So we'll come back and have a look at these, but these are the two that I'm saying are pastel. This is fire. Do we see any pattern modification in this one that would help us to identify fire? Not really. They are actually quite similar. Let me just dig you out a pastel lavender so that you can compare those. Okay, so pastel lavender, you can see the difference in colour immediately from the first one that we looked at. This one is much, much lighter coloured than this one. Also still has some whites on it, whereas this one has gone quite yellow. And the head stamp, orange on top of the head on this one. This girl also has an orangey coloured head stamp, but much, much lighter coloured. So if we look at these two in comparison, you can see that these are quite pale, just like this one. Here we go. So pastel or fire, probably 2 pastels and 1 fire, or maybe the other way around, but you can see the difference in the adult. Much, much lighter coloured snake with pastel. This is Dad. He's a fire lavender, and you can still see some pattern on him. I have to be careful here because this one's a little bit wild, and he has the whitish head stamp. But you can see how overall yellow this guy has got with age. He didn't start out like that, but fire, as they get older, gets more and more yellow. So that's what I would expect from our fire lavenders as they mature, if they are in fact fire, whereas the pastels tend to retain a little bit more colour definition. Okay, so that's Dad. He's a fire lavender. And the head stamp here does have the slight arrowhead shapes on it that is typical of fire. So that may help us to identify some of those babies. Okay, so that is the arrowhead shaped head stamp that we're looking for in these lavenders in order to identify fire. So if we look at these 3, you can see that that doesn't really help us at this stage. The head stamp is not developed enough in these babies to be able to tell. So again, we're going to have to reserve judgment until after shed, and possibly after several sheds, because they're not showing their full colours. Very difficult to tell them apart right now, especially with fire. Fire always gets brighter after the first few sheds. Okay, so those are my initial attempts at IDs. Let's just zoom you out a little bit. Okay, so pastel, het lavender, two firefly het lavenders, one straight lavender, the really dark, nice one here. I really like this one. Let's just sex this. I hope it's female. And yes, it looks to be a female. So that's the really dark one. We have the really, really light coloured one, which I think is the Firefly Lavender. And then we have these three here, which are intermediate. This one being the slightly more orange one, although it's very hard to say. And these are either Pastel or Fire. And I think we've got two pastels here. The white is quite white, and this one is possibly Fire, but we'll have to wait on shed to be able to confirm that, and even then it's going to be quite difficult. Okay, so there we go. She did prove out to be het lavender, which is awesome, and we've got a bunch of visual lavenders there. But as you've seen, trying to decide what has fire or what has pastel in it when it's in a lavender is particularly difficult. Light coloured genes in particular are very hard to identify in lavender, so we'll come back and revisit these when they have shed. I think we've got most of them right, but fire will brighten up and go much more yellow as it ages in our lavenders. So once they've shed, we'll come back and take another look and see if we can do any better. We do have a couple of clutches still in the incubator that are due to hatch later this month, and I've got some awesome clutches here which you've seen before, but they're shedding out now, and I'll give you an update on what they look like after they've shed. And for all of you guys living in Malaysia, don't forget that it's ARP's 12th of the 12th sale, probably starting tomorrow, even though it's only the 11th, so get on down there. There's some awesome deals to be had on some fantastic, well-priced ball pythons. So thanks for watching. Don't forget to share, like and subscribe.